Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the PPM Insights webcast. You can now join us on the second Thursday of every month at 11 Eastern for a lively half hour with some leading PPM experts. You'll get fresh perspectives and expert takes on project and portfolio topics, plus our experts will be answering your questions during the live Q&A. This week's featured expert is Erich Kissel. And Erich is a current industry thought leader you may know as the PPM warrior. He is also a CA services architect and a former customer practitioner who has consulted with a lot of diverse organizations. Erich believes that the common thread for solution value delivery is all about adoption, and that concept has generated a lot of buzz lately. He has been on the forefront of finding new approaches to this and is very passionate about tying PPM and Agile leading practices to organizational readiness. So, Erich, tell us a little bit more about tying PPM and Agile practices together and how that relates to adoption. What are you going to cover today?
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. This is Erich. I'm excited to share some of my feet on the street, real-world perspective, org readiness insights, hopefully. On the screen, you can see a quote, PPM is a human story. There's a number of quotes in this presentation. They're all from me, so you can steal them as you want. But truly, when we're talking about implementing, enhancing, operationalizing, and understanding the PPM ecosystem, more than any other situation, ERP, solution, especially in organizations, PPM touches the most diverse personas, the most amount of people, and it's really important to have org readiness and change management and really the people at the center of all of what we do within that ecosystem. So PPM is a human story. Today I'm going to cover kind of 5 high-level examples of things that I do as a consultant, as well as when I was a customer, specific to PPM. From this PowerPoint, you should be able to create your own solution and overall operationalized org readiness for your organization. So delivering valuable projects and portfolio management outcomes depends on several factors, and we know this. Process and system maturity, everyone's a little bit different, right? Appetite for investment, leader and team skills, understanding user pain and value propositions, internal politics, and changes in reporting structures or key initiatives. The list goes on, right? We've all dealt with this. It even includes changing tools or pivoting towards Agile and DevOps methodologies. As practitioners, we may be in a constant state of flux. It definitely feels like that sometimes. Or worse, monotony. Today we're going to discuss achieving, re-achieving, and transparently demonstrating benefits from PPM processes and systems through an adoptable and adaptable org readiness change management model. So the first section, leverage your resources and make them your own. So we're going to talk through some of the foundations that are available to you, whether they're intra-company or if you just kind of have to grassroots build your own org readiness strategy. I'm going to share the way that I organize and document guiding principles. Again, activities that you can do yourself. Defining the communication plan and training strategy. Hopefully this can be a template for you to build upon. Defining and articulating the what's in it for me. So this is an example of some of the artifacts that we can use throughout our org readiness strategy. And then organizing artifacts. So how do I organize? How can you organize? So failure is expensive and intolerable, which leads to an equally impactful leadership response. So by leveraging a thoughtful approach, we can build an OR solution for PPM, not just and PPM. All right, this is key. Yes, we have trainers. Yes, we have standards in regards to change management and org readiness. But because PPM is such a human story, it's impactful and required to build org readiness for PPM specifically, much more so than other change management required implementations, other systems, other processes within the organization. And by comparison, this is really inexpensive. If we can get out in front with an org readiness strategy within our PPM ecosystem, we can pave the way for huge value delivery with really not much expense. It's really about the thoughtfulness up front. And that's what I'll be pitching to you guys today. All right, so first off, number one, leverage your resources and make them your own. Some organizations have mature org readiness services or practitioners or groups that you can rely on. Some don't, right? And ultimately, it doesn't matter what formal process you use. They all kind of boil down to these common denominators on the screen. So preparing for change, planning for change, managing, and monitoring. Rename these however you want. Follow one of the best practices like ADCAR, like Cotter, like ITIL, fine, right? Or make up your own. But ultimately, it's easy to understand the concept. The hard part is actually working the plan. And that's what I'm going to be going through today. Some examples of how to actually work the plan of org readiness. When I started, I was an ITIL instructor for a couple of years, and I got really into ADCAR when I was a customer, and I absolutely loved a lot of the concepts. And CA, we get exposed a lot to the Cotter methodology. But reality is, I learned more about this on Google and on Twitter and on LinkedIn, joining forums, clicking into those links, attending seminars like this. You can do the same thing, right? So if you have utility at your organization, leverage it. If you don't, you absolutely have the tools available to build your own methodology. All right, number two, document and follow OR guiding principles. So this is one of the first things I do with customers. We do workshops, and we define, top here, OR values. We also define some of the deliverables. This is not a one-size-fits-all. Every organization is different. But these bullet points are great examples or a great baseline for you to start from. So, for example, I will run a workshop with a group, and we'll say, okay, we want to define formal process and methodologies for our org readiness. That is going to be one of our values. We're also going to create reusable and scalable templates. So everything that we do in regards to the efforts of org readiness and change management, we do with these values as our drumbeat. These are some very reasonable and actionable examples. You can create your own. I've implemented these specifically. On the right, you can see example deliverables. Again, mix and match. Maybe you want to do a needs assessment. This might be done by a consultant, or this might be done by a different group within your organization, or maybe you do this yourself, right? But this is absolutely a valuable deliverable that can be produced in support of your org readiness approach. Define a communication plan, define your training strategy, create templates, etc. Okay, so OR is about people doing processes, right? And we know that. And once we've defined our values, we also want to define any assumptions and organize our tool belt, if you will. I do like the analogy of a utility belt because we have different tools for different things that we can use at different times. So getting out in front of org readiness and having an approach really allows us to plug and play when the appropriate situation arises. So here, again, workshops that I do. We define assumptions. Here's a great example of an assumption. Quality of all communications must be high enough to be delivered only virtually. So, of course, one-on-one, in-person training and communication is probably the best, but how realistic is that when we're talking about an implementation of 25,000 timesheet users, for example, right? or being able to communicate to leaders around the world. So we want to make sure, again, as a value and as a drumbeat for the work that we do for org readiness, that our communications are created kind of with the worst case in mind, that it has to be virtual. And then if we get to be face-to-face, great, even better. Then have examples of preferred methods. Every organization is different, again, but pretty much everybody uses email. Pretty much everybody has an intranet, SharePoint sites, leader calls, town halls, etc. Identify what is preferred within your organization. Here's a great example. And then on the right, what are some reusable artifacts that we can use? So do we want to have an elevator pitch? This can be used in email, it can be used in presentations, it can be used in trainings, right? Is this something that we can use throughout our approach? Do we want a logo and an infographic? Again, maybe we want an infographic on a SharePoint site or an intranet site or as the header for an email, right? Identify personas, etc. So as the org readiness lead, defining what tools are going to be in your tool belt is going to absolutely return on investment down the line. All right, this is the big one. Number 3, communication plan and training strategy. So don't be scared, it's a busy chart, but this is literally what I whiteboard with customers. And the point here is just to understand the concept of it so you can do your own version of this. First, on the top left, we see in the red box, impact of org readiness. So oftentimes, training or communication is an afterthought. But reality is, we want to be creating this communication, getting out in front of this message ahead of time. And really, when it resonates, is 30% or so. These are subjective numbers that I've created. You can create your own subjective numbers out front. So my goal for this strategy is to be 30%. I want to have people cognizant of my change and craving my change. I also want to have some level of information. So if we're rolling something out, I want them to understand it's coming. That's it. 20% of my effort and 20% of their impact is the actual training. So if I'm clicking on a timesheet, for example, really going through the hands-on training or reading a little how-to guide is about 20% of the effort. And then 50% is the fortification. It's the operationalized use of that tool. Think about playing a video game. How often you get a little tutorial up front, but when you really learn how to do it is when you're playing. And when you really improve your skills, it's when you're operationalized and doing the activity, getting experience. All right, so next, identifying the change phases. So first we want to kind of build awareness and craving with our audience. Next, we want to give some high-level education, and there's a big difference between education and training, as many of you know. Education is broad. It's kind of like the what we're doing, but it's not the actual hands-on click, right? That's next. Building the skills, and then last, fortification. So use these as your foundation or build your own. ADCAR has a very similar methodology, so does Cotter, so does ITIL, right? Use those or make your own. Next, communication. Guess what? This is the start of our plan of how and what artifacts, what tools in our tool belt are we going to use when. So maybe as part of our cognizance and craving, we want to do our elevator pitch and we want to publish our logo, right? As part of our education, we want to do a what to expect email or do a little video. As part of our building skills and training, we want to do hands-on training and direct office hour invites. And then part of our fortification, we want to do potentially portlets that communicate office hours, ongoing training, audit, right, CAPA, etc. So these are all tools in your tool belt that you can organize here. Also, this purple on the right, this is how we're communicating. So it's really the themes of our messages. So we're starting out with the why, then we're going into the what, and then into the how and operationalized improvement. So when we're sending those emails, when we're doing those trainings, we can encapsulate and scope the type of communication that we're giving. And on the right is the type of audience. Personas are so important in regards to this ecosystem, and communicating them and including them is vital, right? So here's a really simple example of 4 personas, maybe a team member, project manager, portfolio manager, and a leader, and when and how they're going to be communicated to. For example, maybe a team member and a leader should understand why we're implementing PPM or Agile, but they don't necessarily know how to click it, or they don't need to understand how to click on each of the process steps. That's specifically for the project managers or the portfolio managers, right? So it's an overall schedule and training approach. Number 4, here's some examples of reusable artifacts. And it's really important to be consistent when communicating. Different avenues of communication, whether they're general, like big blast, or targeted, centralized, and also with the different personas. We want to be consistent. We want the team members, for example, to understand the value that the leadership is getting from their timesheets, from their time data, right? So yes, we have targeted audiences and communications, but we want to be consistent and reusable in regards to the messaging. So here's a really simple example of some what's in it for me's for a persona. So this is not necessarily something we would just publish, but this is something in our tool belt that we would use as we communicate differently, and then it's consistent. Here's another example of how to use that, right? We have personas, like a project manager is requesting a role on a project, and we understand that that goes to the portfolio managers, and we understand that the team members are engaged and can communicate via time entry. And then we understand that there's escalations to the leadership. Simple process and overall rhythms with consistent messages and consistency of understanding the personas really, really helps the overall adoption and people understanding from different perspectives as well as their own this change. All right, I'm really looking forward to next month's presentation where we talk about operating rhythms and processes. But again, the concept of reusing organizational readiness approach and methodologies and these tools both adds efficiency and quality to our delivery as org readiness professionals, right, leading these changes. All right, number 5, organizing our artifacts. This is really simple. This image shows 2 basic spreadsheets, but if we have a tool belt, we want to organize and understand and put into a calendar our approach. So what I do is I create an OR schedule. So I identify when I'm going to build an email or build a training or build a video, right? Next, I'm going to define what I'm building, how I'm going to deliver it and when, and then who is the audience. And I just stick to the plan. It's not too difficult. Next, I actually schedule out and define my tool belt. So if I have a communication type, how does it best work from a distribution model? Who are the best audiences, and what is the type of message here? So if I know that I want to speak in a town hall next quarter about some of the values of this PPM ecosystem, I know my contact person, I know what I want to talk about, I know the audience, and then I can actually schedule the communication. So really simple, kind of feet on the street examples of things that you can create yourself. So key takeaways and our swag bag. So the difficult part, again, is building the plan and working it. It's not the concepts. I think if you're on this call, you already understand the value of org readiness. You've already done some research or have some certifications, right? The hard part is sitting down, creating a plan, following it, and continuously improving it. Number 2, OR is about people doing processes that profit. PPM and Agile are such people-centric tools and ecosystems. It is core that we take people into account when we are designing changes, when we are solutioning value. 3, OR strategy. Really understand and define the why, the what, the how, and then improvement measurements. That might even include KPIs and operational improvements, identification metrics. 4, create reusable artifacts from the audience perspective. So if I understand all of the personas that will be affected, and I start to plan out how I'm going to communicate to them, then it's essentially a plug and play. All right, so reuse and be consistent. And then last, organize the artifacts for plug and play. It's going to greatly increase quality, and it's going to greatly decrease your effort. So Lisa, I'm going to send it back to you.
Great, thanks, Erich. And in listening to you, you and I have talked a lot of times about the emphasis of an organization's greatest asset being people, not users. And I think as you've been walking through these 5 core concepts, it really comes across strongly how important that is for organizational readiness. So thank you for that. At this point, we would like to invite our participants to enter any questions in the WebEx Q&A window, and Erich will be happy to answer those for you now. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, I'd also invite you to check out the PPM Insights blog, where Erich actually has a 2-part series talking about organizational readiness and other related topics. So regardless of size, any organization can benefit from your independent approach, and I strongly suggest going to the 2-part blog series to get some more detail about how you can extend the concepts that Erich has talked about today into your own organization. So again, if you do have questions, go ahead and enter them in the WebEx Q&A window, and we will take them now. And Erich, while we're waiting for those questions, just real quickly, which of those 5 do you find when you're consulting tends to be the biggest challenge for organizations? Is there one that many organizations struggle with as a common denominator?
Just identifying an org readiness approach is often not included, and training and communication becomes an afterthought. So there's a huge value and super low investment to get out in front of a change, create something like we just discussed in regards to the OR approach up front, because that will trickle down through the entire life cycle of the change. And oftentimes that's not considered, right? If I can impart one message, consider up front, and it's going to pay off for you big.
Good advice. Very good advice. And it looks like we do not have any questions coming in from the participants today. So Erich, I want to thank you today for being our featured expert. For those of you still on the call, we want to invite you to follow him on Twitter at PPM Warrior. And again, check out the PPM Insights blog and the CA PPM community on CA Communities. We'll see how many times I can work community into a sentence. If you don't know where to find the communities, they are at communities.ca.com. So thank you again for joining us today. Join us again next month on the 2nd Thursday for another PPM Insights topic. Thanks, everyone.